This is about to be the ultimate test. I have my camera SD card here, and I have a script, which I just finished writing today. I have yet to run it, and my hope is when I actually run it for the first time, it's going to do what I intend for it to do, and I'm not going to have to spend the video troubleshooting instead of actually showing you what the script is meant to do. So let me go ahead and plug in my SD card here. And I'm going to go ahead and double check that it mounted, because that's half of what's going on, and that's actually using udev, which I'm going to get to here. But anyways, let's check that it mounted. It should be under like SDF, I think. Okay, looks like it mounted. So I'm going to go ahead and run this script, and then I will explain in theory what it's doing. Okay, it looks like it's working. It looks like it's working. Perfect. Alright, so yesterday I had the epiphany, after transferring photos for probably the 1000th time at this point, that I should just automate the process, because, you know, it's not more than a minute to, like, go make a directory in the right place, and then, you know, move over the photos, and, you know, mounting the SD card first of all, and then when I'm done, you know, wait for it to all finish, then open Darktable, go ahead, import the correct folder, all of that. It's not like it takes more than a minute, but I do it pretty much every day, if not sometimes multiple times a day. So overall, it would be worth it to have, you know, a short script to do it in one command instead of having to actually manually perform those commands every single time. So anyways, this needs to be done in pretty much 3 parts. The first part being automatically mounting the SD card when I plug it in, for convenience pretty much, so I don't have to manually mount it. Second part being creating a folder for the date, since I usually organize stuff by date, at least for raw images, so make a folder in the right location for the date. Then move all of the files from the SD card, all of the files of the CR2 image type here, move them from the SD card into the correct folder. And then once it's fully done, give me some options for if I want to unmount the SD card, or if I want to open Darktable in that folder, etc. So the first part, I am using udev in order to mount the SD card automatically. I guess there's a couple ways that you could do this, but I think udev is sort of the right way to do it in this case, since it's an unpluggable device, right? And if you don't know what udev is, it's essentially a device manager for the Linux kernel. When you have an event that the kernel listens for, like for example plugging in a SD card or a USB disk, or even something like a webcam, right? Any device, udev is going to listen for that. It's going to create a device node in /dev, and it also offers you control over what happens when you plug something in. That's with udev rules. So that's how you can do stuff like automatically mounting an SD card or a USB stick, or I don't know, in the example here on the ArchWiki, creating a symlink, or plenty of other stuff. So essentially, you want something to happen when a device gets plugged in. This is what udev rules is for. And you have actually 2 sets of rules. You have rules that are automatically created with various packages. I think an example of this is like OpenRGB. I was looking at its rule, for example, and there's plenty of other packages that have rules that it creates, and you can actually look in this directory for reference if you want to learn about the rules. And then you can create your own rules in etc udev-rules.d. So that is where I have my rule created for this SD card, and if I go ahead and edit that file, etc udev-rules.d, and then it should be under 99 SD card rules. So this is actually a pretty important file name here for the 99 is a priority number. 99 is actually the highest priority number, and I did a little bit of testing. 60 and 70 were too low for this to work. It seemed like in the 80s worked, but I went with 99 just to demonstrate that it's the highest priority number. The file name does need to end in .rules, and the SD card is just, you know, that's an arbitrary name that I gave it. So the way the priority numbers work, I will actually put in the description if I can find better guidelines about it. I think it was in one of the man pages for, like, udev or something else. The ArchWiki actually doesn't mention it at all, surprisingly, but the number is pretty important, so I will put more info about that in the description. But if all else fails, try with 99. Anyways, so what's going on in this file? First thing is the action being add, so when the device is plugged in, that would be add. If I wanted to do something when it was removed, I would just substitute this with the word remove. Next up is actually identifying what USB disk or SD card or whatever this is. So I know it's going to be in slot between F and H, so SDF through SDH. I figured SDF through SDH since I've got a couple other USB sticks, one might be plugged in, whatever. And also slot 0 through 9, so SDF1 is what I'm thinking it usually appears as. But based on that, I also need to go based on the UUID, so I can make sure I'm getting the correct device in case, you know, I had another SD card plugged in or something. And to get your device UUID, there's a bunch of ways to do it, but you can just lsblk -o, and then I think it's a plus UUID. And let me grep out SDF and see if we get the... Okay, yeah, so that's going to show the UUID. A bunch of other ways as well to view UUID, but that's one of them. So put your UUID, and then... Okay, perfect. It actually... Alright, it works. So let's actually go ahead and open Darktable. Let's see if this fully works. I'm really hoping this works. Alright, we've got photos. Alright, this is pretty cool. Okay, perfect. Alright, my script works. Anyways, so what's going on? Run is just gonna give the systemd mount command here. Actually, I should explain why I'm using systemd mount as opposed to normal mount. It is for a specific reason which the ArchWiki actually gives some info on. So when you're going to mount drives in rules, you should not be just using your typical mount command, right? Because normally when you're mounting something, you just go like mount dev sdf1, you know, /mnt, something like that, right? And you'd just be using normal mount command here. However, the ArchWiki says you should not be doing that because if you do that, you will essentially have mounts that are not visible to the rest of the system. And even if you manage to bypass that and, you know, make it visible, you're going to have a bunch of other errors. So the options that work are a custom systemd service, using systemd-mount instead of mount, or udisks, etc. And I figured, you know, systemd mount is probably the simplest way to do it out of these options, just because it's essentially just a replacement for the mount command. If we look at the man of systemd-mount here, the main difference is instead of executing the mount operation directly and immediately, systemd mount schedules it through the service manager job queue. So it's essentially mount, just slightly different, and the ArchWiki recommends doing that instead of just normal mount, since normal mount isn't going to work. So anyways, that's why I'm using systemd mount here. And the flags are pretty simple, just no block, I believe was just for running it in the background. Auto mount is just going to auto mount. Collect, I believe, is automatically unmount. And just some extra flags for permissions. This is just gonna figure out the right device there, and then mount SD card is where I want it to mount to. So that is the udev rule there, and once you've created your rule file, you can just run udev adm control -- reload. You could also force it, but I didn't need to force it, it just worked when I reloaded it. The logs, if you need to look at logs, are mentioned somewhere in this ArchWiki article, which I will link in the description, so you can also look at logs if you need to, but anyways, you should then be automatically mounting what you are trying to automatically mount. What was I looking for? Okay, so it looks like this is just a Darktable error, I can ignore that. Anyways, so onto the script itself. Honestly, if you're familiar with shell scripting, this is a pretty simple script overall. I'm not really doing anything super complicated, but I will go over it quickly. So the bottom part is actually the most important part, just telling me what's going to happen when I run the photo transfer command, or, well, script here when I run the script. $1 for the first argument. Mount is going to call the mount function, unmount. DT is going to call the Darktable function, and then anything else, so running it without an argument, is going to run this auto function, which is the main thing going on, which is actually creating that folder and then transferring the photos. I actually defined a folder up here, just so I could, you know, change the folder if I wanted to. So first of all, we're actually going to test to make sure the card is actually mounted by checking to see if the DCIM directory exists in mount SD card, because if the card was not mounted, that directory wouldn't exist, and if it wasn't mounted, you know, it would just exit the script. So that way it doesn't try to run anything if it's not mounted. Send me a notification, assuming it is mounted, and then go ahead, make the directory in the folder above with a directory based on the date here. The -p is just in case I'm transferring photos like twice in one day, so that way make dir doesn't error out when there's already a directory existing with this date. And then it's just going to use the find command to go on that card and find anything that ends in CR2, since that's the canon raw images. Sometimes they're in multiple folders and stuff, so just search the whole card for CR2s and then just drag them over with MV. -NV is just going to be for not overwriting existing, and then verbose, so that way it actually shows me as it's transferring stuff. So move them all into that folder, and then once that's all finished, run post run, which is this function, which is just going to send me a notification, and it's going to open that D menu prompt that you saw with these options. And as per usual with D menu, I've shown this like a million times, so I won't dwell on it too much, but print in a bunch of options, use D menu, center it 3 lines, give it a prompt, and then just use a case here to set up what's going to happen when something is selected. So it's just going to call the correct functions. I also have an option for doing nothing if I want to. I could just completely exit it, but anyways, I wanted either just unmounting the card or opening Darktable and then unmounting the card. So I've then got these functions up here for everything else, so unmounting, and that's just going to use systemd mount, again, just with the unmount flag. Go ahead, unmount it, send a notification. Opening Darktable is just as simple as just Darktable and then give it a folder, which is good that Darktable actually supports that. Good program, honestly, I can't recommend it enough. Anyways, I also just got a mount option here quickly just to like check if the card is mounted. You know, I can run like photo, transfer, and then mount, and that'll just tell me, oh, apparently it's not mounted because it automatically unmounts when I open Darktable. I don't know why I did it like that, but I figured, you know, if I'm gonna go ahead open Darktable, I don't need it mounted anymore. Anyways, so it seems like the script worked. It's pretty rough right now. I might clean it up a little bit before I post it to GitHub, but it will be there if you want to reference it. Mostly just wanted to show just kind of some stuff with udev, and, you know, this is a way to automate something. If you've got something going on that, you know, takes you a few minutes and you would, you know, rather condense it to a 5-second command, then it's worth it to do it. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed. I'll see you next time. Peace.